Okay, welcome all. This is the Embodied Dialogue podcast. My name is Seth Dellinger, and I'm very happy to be with two very special guests today, Larissa Babij and Daniel Garner. I'll give a little introduction about for each of them, but I can say that both of you are very gifted writers, which is one connection. Larissa is the author of a book called A Kind of Refugee, and she also publishes a Substack as well by under that same title, and it's all about her experience of living right now in Ukraine, which of course has been under attack by Russia for 4 years now. And so she brings that perspective. She is also the managing editor of the London Ukrainian Review, and she was just sharing with us, she's originally born in the United States, but has been in Ukraine for the last 20 years. So she also has, as you were saying, Larissa, a foot in both worlds, and she can share that. And Larissa and I are both trained as Feldenkrais practitioners, which is a somatic movement modality, which I can say for me in more recent years, the whole approach of the Feldenkrais method to just the overall process of learning that we human beings have has sort of been where my work goes, and why some people might wonder why I do these long form podcast conversations when my YouTube channel has a lot of videos about like what to do, if you have neck pain and that kind of thing. But this is something that Larissa and I share, and we did a conversation a couple of years ago about her perspective coming from Feldenkrais, which Feldenkrais was originally a martial artist and definitely had a lot of direct wartime experiences. And Larissa and I had that conversation a couple of years ago. At the time, I was an editor for one of the publications of the Feldenkrais Guild of North America, but this is the first time we've met on this YouTube channel. So I'm excited about that. And Daniel Garner, if people have watched this channel, may have seen Daniel before. Daniel, along with his wife, Michelle, are a team that writes together under the name of OG Rose. They write fiction, they write poetry, and an extensive amount of philosophy. And Daniel always hosts a regular conversation online at the Net, which is a place where all kinds of people gather and really talk about what's going on and what they're thinking about and creative projects. And I think, again, there's a lot of similarity in the spirit of what both of you are up to in the world. But this particular conversation comes from a correspondence between Larissa and myself. And Larissa had actually seen some of the conversations with Daniel and basically said, well, it's great to listen, but I'd love to join in and be a part of it. So we're we identified some themes in emails that we traded, but there's also a way that this is just a space for us to see where the conversation goes. But I'd love to first just see if each of you would like to add anything to the introduction, keeping in mind, especially with Larissa, that probably the audience on my channel is meeting you for the first time. So feel free to give some more of your background, and then after that we'll just sort of see where it goes. But if you'd like to jump in, Larissa, please do.
Thank you, Seth, for hosting us, for bringing Daniel and me together in one virtual space, at least in the same time, even if we're on different continents. And yes, it's an honor and it's a pleasure to be here. I think any kind of personal details maybe will come out through the course of the conversation as relevant. The thing that really I was most interested in the thing that we're basically demonstrating and doing at the same time is this kind of encounter to have a conversation, even though we're in very different physical places. And I think that's a question that I've really been dealing with my entire life, because I was born in the United States to a Ukrainian immigrant family. So I think I even grew up with this sense of being attached to something that was very far away from me that I had never even seen before. And so in my adult life that I've lived in Ukraine, I have maintained an attachment to the United States, which is also, a place where most of the time I am physically not there. And so something that would be nice to develop over the course of this conversation is the way that in a world where we're super mega connected through all of these technologies that we have, from the Zoom to our phone chats to, a 24/7 news cycle, which one might feel expected to keep up with, but physically, humanly is absolutely impossible to actually be able to engage with the amount of information that's available to us at any given moment. How do we come to some sort of formation of like political relationships, these kind of conversations that we're having? I mean, the thing that I'm just, profoundly curious about, even at the very present moment, is how do we make this initiative, this interest, this desire, this need become more than just like a personal 3 people got together to have an interesting conversation. And, obviously, yes, it can be shared by broadcasting, which is already something. And I don't have answers to these questions. And so maybe I'm like, well, let's just do it and see what comes of it.
Larissa, just before going over to Daniel, would you like to say a little bit more about what you do day in, day out, your work as a writer, maybe about the London Ukrainian Review or about a kind of refugee, just to give a little more context for people listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because my long professional experience has been varied. It's always been involved with culture and the arts. There has been, political activism involved in that. But at the present moment, I work as the managing editor of the London Ukrainian Review, as a translator and a writer. So I'm a word person, although I also have, as Seth mentioned, training in the Feldenkrais method and dance. So my words very much come from a place of embodied movement. Oof, that sounds very fancy. It's supposed to be the other way around. The body and, movement experience is supposed to ground what I say. But, the thing that, the thing that I'm trying to do in these professional activities. So the London Ukrainian Review is an open access journal that's published primarily online. So you don't need to pay for it. You can just go on londonyukrainianreview.org and you can read all of the issues that we have. And we are basically, dealing with issues of global importance from a Ukrainian centered perspective. So kind of how can the Ukrainian experience, political, cultural, et cetera, grounded in living in Ukraine, also in the midst of full-scale war, how can that add a unique perspective to discourses that people all around the world are thinking about? And along with that, I've started publishing a monthly newsletter called the Lur Culture Brief, which is also, again, trying to share Ukrainian culture in the broadest sense. We feature voices of people who are serving the armed forces every month in translation, and kind of, making the real lived Ukrainian culture that's happening today more accessible to anyone around the world who can read English, and kind of, helping to reduce stereotypes and a lot of kind of traditional ways that people have thought about Ukraine, which have also been very much shaped by Russian politics, but that's another subject. So hopefully, and then on a kind of refugee, I'm writing more about personal experience of just what it's like to live an ordinary life in absolutely unordinary circumstances in the midst of full-scale war, which, by the way, the Russian invasion started in 2014. So the full-scale war has been going on for 4 years, but Russia has actually been invading Ukraine for 12 years at this point, going on 13.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that correction. I mean, I expect to be repeatedly corrected on my understanding of what's happening. I mean, that's one of the things that really just becomes very present for me when I'm talking with you. And yet when I read a kind of refugee and I read some of the stories of individuals in Ukraine, that is so much easier for me from a distance to actually grab onto and understand something rather than reading the latest, update on, there was talks in Florida between the US and Ukraine. But like when I read an article like that, it's very hard for me to get a sense of anything. But I can't remember if it was the new culture brief you just mentioned or kind of refugee, but like one of the things I was just reading before the call about a woman who's a mother of four who decided to join, on the front lines. And like, how does a person make a decision like that? And, what's that like? And so you're telling those kinds of stories, which I think is just so valuable. So yeah, I'd love to pass it to Daniel. Again, maybe if you want to give a little bit of an introduction just to the work of OG Rose, but then just any other responses to what Larissa's already brought in.
Well, I'm again grateful to be here and honored to have the opportunity. So thank you, Seth, for arranging it, and Larissa, it's an honor to speak with you. And thank you for being here, and thank you for all you do. And I highly suggest your Substack. Everyone, go subscribe to that immediately. The writing is tremendous. OG Rose, Opperman Garner Rose, Michelle's maiden name plus my last name and her grandmother's first name, Rose, put together. Started 2011, fiction, been writing ever since. Run a wedding venue, 4 kids, unloaded trucks at a wholesale, teach piano, all sorts of fun things. Hang out in the garage. So, we put a carpet in, so it's like a room now. So it makes it fun. So we have a good old time. And I really, the topics, I must say, the topics that Larissa opened up with there are ones that I don't want to say obsessed with, but I think are actually huge and like major. And I won't, by any means of imagination, claim to have all the answers. But I think there is something here to be circled, orbited, to kind of get at, articulate, say, no, that's not quite it. Let's try from this angle. Let's try to this angle. Because if we can't articulate something, then we may intuit it, but we won't really understand it. And if we don't understand it, we can't get a grip on it to maybe make it blossom into its fullness. So words really matter. There's always that idea of, we spoke about writing, that idea of, my, when I write the story, it's never what I envisioned it. It's never perfect in the way that I thought. C.S. Peirce has that idea, I think he said, a shot at the riddle. All writing is a guess at the riddle, right? But that guess really matters, because even if it doesn't capture the whole, it's a step. It's an articulation that makes you more confident that there's something here that it's worth thinking about, and you're not as anxious to worry that you're wasting your time or you're just grasping at straws. Like, words create a confidence to deal with the mystery and the unknown. And there's, I think when we talk about the ideas of progress and so on and so forth, and many, the world is such a place that people question that increasingly. What does it mean to talk about progress? But there's a way in which, if there is, progress, I think it has a lot to do with actually gaining confidence to move toward and articulate the mystery, and to try to kind of grasp at different things. And I think writing's part of that, and conversations like this are part of that. I think on this question of what can so on the political, on democracy, on the globe, one of the things I'm already starting to, think about is the fact that in precisely just a little bit of time of meeting you, Larissa, I feel like I have more of an like even a more better felt sense of what's going on in Ukraine than it's from years of reading foreign affairs or different things like that, right? Like, it is just how meeting a person creates a felt sense. And I know one of the problems is we're trying to have a world of people learning about events that don't start with a felt sense, and they don't start with a connection. So then actually I think one of the problems is like, if you're over in Virginia here and you're trying to be informed about what's going on in Ukraine, anywhere, there's always that question of, is this manipulated? Is this propaganda? What's true? What's false? And you can feel kind of overwhelmed by that feeling, right? And because you're overwhelmed by that feeling, if you are trying to learn, it can be a kind of obsessive denial of that feeling to make it go away, but that's actually the wrong spirit. Or you give up and say whatever, and now you can be manipulated by power, right? But when you start with the felt sense of a personal connection, the first thing I just want to note is that feeling, because it's like, maybe we can actually get an understanding of what's going on. Maybe it isn't a hopeless game of wrestling against propaganda and trying to learn and never being able to trust your sources. It starts with a felt sense that goes a really long way to, I think, fighting the anxiety that our information age creates. And I'm thinking about here, without going into them, people like Paul Virilio and all of that. More and more, I am convinced that we are trying to submit people to political arrangements and political engagement without doing the pre-work necessary for that possibility in a world where those topics are increasingly intense. Like if you don't have, say, nervous system regulation, if you're not able to hear an idea you disagree with and not freak out, then you can't do democracy. And I think that's kind of ultimately something too that we have seen failed. And I do think we can say fail. Is the possibility of a democracy of, I almost want to say, pure information, or without taking the body seriously or the nervous system seriously. Like it cannot be done because either people get overwhelmed or they get tribalized because there's some ideas they just naturally agree with or they rage bait them and all these other terminologies. And so it doesn't quite work. Now, I'm happy to go into details, and these are just opening thoughts. You have to do some sort of work of tilling the soil. And that has much more to do with the body, much more with face-to-face interaction and connection. And then you can begin thinking. You can't even begin thinking until you do that work, if you will. It's like my beloved Hume or the Kyoto School talking about you have to be based in common life, like in something solid in particular. Now, of course, the million-dollar question is looking to like Michelle Bowens and different people. To what degree does this technology, which I call, as we talked about, the social coordination mechanism, the Zoom recording structure, to what degree does this allow a better bridging of the particular and the global, the local and the, you know, in the bigger world, right? Because for most of history, those things couldn't be put together very well at all, right? But now I have access, now I have the ability to be in a conversation with someone in Ukraine without having to ask ABC or CNN or someone for permission, without having to raise money and get the technology. I can just jump on and have that connection. And that seems to me, the first thing I'll say, that to me seems like a very, very big deal, because that seems to be in the direction of it being possible to start with that felt sense that otherwise we could never begin with. Now, I'm not saying that's all we need to do, but that seems to be a step in the right direction. And if we don't take that step, I do fear that basically global politics are just going to return to great powers games, and they're going to just go more and more in the direction of manipulation, violence, or overwhelm. I would like to see that not happen, but that means we have to do the work so that it doesn't happen. And I do think this is part of that. But how exactly is part of the guessing at the riddle that we are engaged in now.
Well, I'll just add one comment here. I'm messing with Zoom controls as well. So the question of my relationship to my country, and my country being part of the world. And it's funny because I've lived in the United States all of my life. And for most of my life, despite the fact that there are two different political parties who have alternated, you know, in the presidency and control of the Congress and all of that, I haven't felt much alignment with the government of the country I lived in from the very beginning. Now, if I compare the experience of the United States to other places in the world, and I've had some opportunity to travel, you know, I can become a little more aware of what I'm grateful for about living in the United States. But, you know, for example, when the United States starts bombing Iran and someone's talking and they say, we're bombing Iran, I would never use the pronoun we. Like, I don't feel like I have anything to do with that. But then I begin to ask myself, is that statement that I have nothing to do with that, is that just a shirking of responsibility? So, but, you know, if I'm going to sort of take responsibility for my opposition to the bombing of Iran, in my mind, it becomes, to borrow that phrase that Daniel used, it's a kind of a riddle as to what should I do? I mean, there are, you know, sort of stock answers connected to the way politics works about contacting Congress people and doing things like that. But as I was saying before we began this call, actually being in a conversation like this, or even just talking, with others about, well, what the heck is going on there? We had a recent conversation at the Net with Daniel about, gas prices are going to go up, and how do you deal with that? But like, how do you deal with that in relation to your family? How do you do something that is wise, that's taking into account the reality of the situation, but is also this question of nervous system regulation. You're still staying grounded in, I don't forget who I am and what my values are just because gas prices might go up or whatnot. But then when I think of you, Larissa, I think, okay, I say all these things about, not feeling connected to the US, but if the US was experiencing what you are experiencing in Ukraine, wouldn't I want the bombs to stop falling? Wouldn't I want, my family and my neighbors to be safe? And so if I reveal a little of my my radical past, I think there's a quote from Leon Trotsky who said, "You might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." Or you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And so, as I said before, when I'm talking with you, I realize that so many things for me that are kind of abstract are not abstract at all for you. And I just want to, really honor that. And I think the best way I can honor that at this point is to just turn it over to you and invite you to share what's on your mind so far. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a bunch of things I want to say all at the same time, as usual. I think, first of all, something that the three of us have in common, and definitely Seth and I in our Feldenkrais background, is that like this attention to the body and the nervous system, and that our life and our discourse and our most philosophical ideas, they have to be related to this. Like without like this and all of this, it's just a sort of abstract thing. And Seth, you had mentioned, just now kind of about how you imagining me in Ukraine, and how do I say it? Like something that I feel is very special about this particular conversation we're having right now, even just in the way that I think about it, is that we're having a conversation as equals, that we're coming from different places. Like I do a lot of my professional life, and it just kind of slips out of, all boundaries. Like a lot of what I do is this sort of either formal or informal, pro-Ukrainian diplomacy, because I feel like I have to constantly be, this voice for, a particular position of defending Ukraine's existence, because I'm not doing it with firearms right now. And so, I constantly have to do it with my voice. But I also feel that with you, Seth, and you, Daniel, right now, we are able to I very much trust in the way that you are thinking about your embodied political discursive experience in the various places where you are. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm curious about, is how we can kind of relate to each other from those respective places, in that perhaps, I think like your respective daily lives to me are a little bit abstract, and and to kind of pull that into this place that is common between us, besides perhaps the color of our passports, and then from there, right, is the relationship to what our government is doing, because I think something that has really changed is this, even if I'm going to take a step into the past in Ukraine, unless anyone wants to say anything right now, because I could just say, okay, is that like 4 years ago in 2022, there was a big surprise when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. And that surprise and that shock also had how to say it, inspired, it led to there, like the way that people responded to that shock was to kind of mobilize, panic, but like act. And Ukrainians responded in a very clear and decisive way to defend themselves. And the world was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. We're going to support the Ukrainians who are defending themselves. And the fact that, okay, this is again a long story. I don't want to go into all this thing, but like, kind of the general thing that we see, what has happened between 4 years ago and today is that Russia is still invading Ukraine. The world, together with Ukraine, did not mobilize their forces to defeat Russia and make it impossible for Russia to stop invading Ukraine or other neighbors, or stop, wreaking havoc and pursuing its policies throughout the globe to destabilize many countries. And so we're all still here, which is wonderful. But I don't know how you feel. I mean, I feel often also like a degree of disorientation as far as like, there isn't that very obvious, like, this is the enemy. Yes, this goes back to what you were saying, Seth, about Iran, that like you might disagree with your government, with our government's policies to go ahead and start a military campaign against Iran right now. But there also isn't like a super clear, if you go and protest, then does that mean that you're supporting the Iranian regime right now that just murdered 40,000 of its citizens? There's a lot of really confusing places right now, as far as I feel like a number of different factors have really made it difficult to like take black and white positions, even though that's what a war demands of you. Like, a war demands of you, you have to be on one side or the other. You can't be like, well, there's a, but I feel like there's all these different splintered wars happening right now. And so like you could, if you stand on this side, like, if I'm on this side in the Ukraine versus Russia, I'm defending Ukraine, but then I'm also an American. And if I'm, critical of Trump, that makes me what?
Right. Yeah.
Yes, I should not. Anyways, if I start riffing here, I feel like I will also end up saying something that does not necessarily agree with what I believe. So I'm going to pause here.
Yeah, but it's just, I want to pass it over to Daniel, but I think what you just said underlines that the tangle goes right into our bodies. Like, can I actually trust that if I just express myself authentically, even I will be happy with what I just said, a minute from now? How can I authentically, and the thing is, I think that another place we might get grounding is in some kind of first principles, right? So like if you have a religious orientation, this is how I feel about my fellow man, my fellow human, However, as you pointed out, the world is going to present me with black and white choices nonetheless, right? So I can, say I love my brother, but if my brother comes after me violently, now I could say that, defending myself or even stopping him from hurting me or hurting others could be an act of love. I could put it that way, but it's true that, it goes right into our bodies. And another thing I'd love to offer to both of you is, like, when you were describing the full-scale invasion happened and Ukrainians were clear, but the rest of the world was not, right? Something Daniel and I have talked about is just the sort of common parlance of people talk about being triggered, right? You use the word shock. There was a shock. But also when we, let's say, receive like some kind of violent or dramatic or just overwhelming stimulus, if we work with it and we manage to maybe in the moment, or maybe it takes more time when we process it, there's a way that we can actually be stronger because I survived that. I know how to survive that kind of thing. And maybe in the next situation, my capacity I mean, I never know what my capacity is in the next situation, but I know what my capacity just was in that thing that I lived through before, and it will inform my posture in this new situation. So in that sense, I just want to say my sense of reading your work is that Ukraine is, we could say, from one point of view, is like on the forefront of learning something that the entire world needs to learn. Right? Like, I only imagine bombs raining down on Washington, D.C., but it doesn't feel completely impossible. And yet I haven't lived it, right? With Daniel, we've talked about, we had that conversation I mentioned, but we've had conversations where we sort of imagine devastation. And what would you do? And do you know how to do very basic things? Like, you have that article where you're talking about you and a number of your friends who are sort of in charge of one of the buildings. And you have this line in there, like basic questions of like, how do we keep the electricity, functioning? How do we, and you sort of say, it's ridiculous. None of us are qualified to do this, but here we are, we're doing it. So I just sort of wanted to put that in, that there's, like, the difficulties that we experience, including in the felt sense, are also these learning opportunities if we can manage to not be overwhelmed by them. But different lessons are being learned in different places, which is why I think it's another value of having an exchange like this.
No, wonderful. I appreciate what both of you were sharing, big time. Something that feeling of being tangled up that you were describing, Larissa. Like, if you want support in Ukraine from the government, but then there's Iran thing, it's all mixed up. And what do you do in the Trump? If I'm critical of Trump, and that feeling of that tangled upness. I'm not going to say I know this for sure. There is something about that feeling that I think describes a lot of people, maybe the majority of people, that there's this tangled upness. And people tend to respond to that tangled upness, which is also a feeling of an inability to process or arrive or know what to do with that feeling. That tends to either erupt in anger. It either find other people I can share my anger with, kind of a thematic kind of thing, kind of themos kind of notion, or repression. Let me keep it in, but then I blow up on my kids one day, or let me numb myself. And to say something large, basically, I think we have created a situation where the media, there's that phrase, the material condition, but I want to say the medium condition is not proper for what we need to deal to the level of interconnectivity, complexity that we are dealing with today. And that's where this technology for me is a big deal. So let me explain. In history, when you have the invention of, say, the newspaper, that literally changes everything. Like, the invention of writing changes everything. You can't, you can imagine the impossibility of managing all the different providences in China before paper, right? Because you couldn't send messages, right? So the written word radically transforms the social and political possibilities of the world, right? So it goes with radio, so it goes with TV, so it goes with internet. And basically, what I think we are running into is we are still primarily using our information technologies like the internet, like TV, et cetera, so forth, for a 20th century world that is more like the 90s, and it is inadequate in our use and in fact makes things way worse. And we have to have a new use of the medium condition for the 21st century that is more like this. Like, for example, oh my gosh, just having the ability to speak with you, Larissa, or right now, how much I would love to be able to speak with, military people in the U.S. military who are thinking about Iran, people in Iran, like to literally speak to them, right? Because there's this problem of what do I believe and what do I think, right? Well, there's something very interesting about talking to a person where even if you don't arrive on a set position, you literally actually can almost feel like you've more encountered this situation where it's almost more real to you, right? And that in of itself changes the felt sense in the body, right? It can give you a sense of what should I prioritize, what should I not, what should I emphasize, what should I not. It gives you a sense of how to order the information emotionally, right? You can't get that from CNN. You can't get that from the expert class, because also we don't trust the expert class due to the collapse of institutions and all of that other stuff. And then you get taken advantage of. So there's this real need, because for me, the social coordination mechanism, basically we have two choices. We're either going to use the internet primarily for consumption, which is just going to lead to the tangled feeling because we have no means to process that information we take in. Like, you must have, in proportion to the amount of information you take in, a means of processing, which is primarily going to be in the body, in relation, in conversation, and encountering people face to face, right? So if we continue to intensify the internet and AI and all of that without spreading the use of the internet in this way, I think our situations are going to get worse and worse. And in fact, that way of using the internet versus this, what I consider a sublimation, I consider this a new medium. This is not merely the internet. It's a new medium condition. It's basically an innovation moving from like, books to TV or oral tradition to written tradition. This is kind of, you could almost say, a Zoom tradition. This changes subjectivity. This changes how people think and how people feel. And it is way easier. Well, there's a bunch of things. It's way easier to treat people like flat cutouts when you've never seen their face because you've said never gone to Ukraine or never gone to China or never gone to these different places versus when you've spoken to them. And just that little reminder, hey, these are full, complicated human beings that have emotions and feelings as well. It's like, oh, right. That makes you less susceptible to being taken advantage of. And it also gives you a felt sense of how to approach the situation. So I guess, before I keep talking, I am of the opinion that I guess a lot of the work I think about, or maybe, Michelle and I see ourselves as doing, is there's a real sense in which we have to change, I want to say, the conditions of possibility, the infrastructure, the medium condition of the world to deal with these problems. Like, there's a way in which, until we do that, we can't even address these problems because we're trying to address them through 20th century mediums or by a subjectivity or body or brain that is shaped by those mediums in a manner that can't handle it. In fact, they just get tangled up, don't know where to start, and blow up or something, or manipulatable. Like, there's a really important work now, I think, on basically setting the conditions. Like, we have to do this kind of tilling the soil work to even approach the political and global situation. And I think this technology is part of it. And, the other thing I guess I'll say as well, when the written word is invented, the people inventing the written word don't know of all the genres of poetry it's going to invent. Like, you don't know of all the things that the medium can be used for when you invent it, right? I am a strong believer. I guess I keep emphasizing this medium because I think a huge part of the puzzle is the ability for us in Virginia on the ground, not through the power structure, but us to coordinate our own social interactions with one another. You can't have democracy unless you can move democratically, I want to say. Like, if you have to move through the power structure, then it's not really democracy at that point, because it's going to be siloed and channeled, right? Like, you have to be able to move democratically. And, we were talking before you start, it's completely the case that this is not the same as meeting someone face to face. But now that, Seth and we meet in real life, now that you're like, oh, you'd have someone in Ukraine you could actually meet. Like, one of I won't keep going, although I could, is this opens up possibilities of travel that otherwise you'd never have. You need a travel agent. And okay, I go to Oklahoma. Well, who do I even meet in Oklahoma? Where do I stay? Oh, well, I know Jeff. Oh, I'll go see Jeff. And actually now I have a reason. And here's the other key. Jeff will probably take me through Oklahoma. That's not just the tourist traps. He'll take me to the actual Oklahoma, right? Where I can actually get a texture. And I really do think for most of history, traveling was pretty reserved for the elites because it was logistically too difficult for average people. But now you have all of those things opening. So you have a humanization, you have a lowering the logistical challenges, a different flow of movement, much more to be said. But I have too many sticky notes. I'll stop. I just have sticky notes everywhere.
Question to Daniel, and then probably a version of this question to Seth as well. But so basically, the thing that I've kind of stuck on, you've mentioned a couple of times the fact that it's amazing that you and I are speaking together, that we've met, but we didn't just randomly run into each other in the internet. We're very much connected through Seth, and I think, and how to say, and again, and not casually, I think each of us have like a very, precise relationship with Seth that brought us together. And so when you're talking about this wonderful social coordination mechanism, which is this, not just the internet for reproduction, but like for, person to person, real time encounters, what is your organizing principle to, like, again, being a human being, you sleep some hours in the day, I'm sure, and you spend some time to eat and you spend some time to walk around, and like, so with your human limitations, how do you orient to like find that I'm going to talk to this person, but I'm not going to talk to this person, and like which doors are opening, how much of it is it providence, how much of it is your intention, seeking, etc., if that makes sense?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That's a really excellent question. So there's a lot to that. So the first thing I'll say is this is where, if I take YouTube, I do think YouTube is very, very different from like Facebook and Instagram and different things like that, because it's this place where you stumble upon people. And then critically, this is where the record function is so important. I now have the ability to overhear conversations. And really in history, if you just got lucky and happened to be sitting in the, HUDs to listen to Mr. Frey and Mr. Dillard over talk and learn from that, I really think human beings uniquely learn from overhearing conversation almost more than lectures. And now YouTube is full of these conversations you can overhear that also feel more alive and dynamic. And, if you just happen to be sitting in the bar where David's, Adam Smith and David Hume were talking and overheard that, you got really lucky, but that was really hard. It is now something like YouTube as a centralization of overheard conversations, allow you to overhear things and to bump into things that you didn't know you didn't know. Because the main problem that I think you're pointing to, that, and this is, I almost want to say, the biggest social, and this might be too large, but it's like one of the biggest social problems in life problems, is the problem of what I call true ignorance, which is you don't know what you don't know. Well, if you don't know, you don't know, then you feel like you know. When you know you don't know, you feel like you don't know. But when you don't know, well, then there's nothing to do, right? So here's a problem. If you don't know about Feldenkrais, if you don't know that you're being manipulated by the system, if you don't know X, Y, and Z, how would you even begin? How would you even begin to like learn that you don't know, right? This is $1 million problem, which is one reason why we're manipulatable, why we miss out on so much of life, why we don't develop in the ways that we should, et cetera, so forth. The only way you can deal with the problem of true ignorance is, one, dedicate education to it, and robust social environments where you can run into things and stumble upon, and to create a culture where that is also seen as kind of a norm, right? Like where you actually, when you use the internet, the cultural way to use the internet is to put yourself in places regularly where you can encounter what you don't know, right? But then you have to have the openness to be able to do it, right? Like when I first talk with Seth, do I know what I'm going to talk with Seth? Do I not know? No, but I see Seth. And you're open to what he has to learn. And then also as well, when you watch a video of Seth talking to Aspasi or different people, and you see that personality and you go, oh, this is someone of whom I should meet, right? And of course, not every single human being, before I keep talking, but you're not going to meet every single person on planet Earth. But if you develop a culture of sort of looking, openness, and regularly putting yourself in places of possible overhearing and social interaction and kind of robust social environments versus using the internet just to consume. Most people are using the internet just to consume. Let's say it this way. We need a culture where we use the internet to overhear and meet, not consume and entertain. That's really a lot of our choice right now. Are we going to use this medium to consume and entertain and thus kind of more isolate, or are we going to use it to overhear and meet? The reason why the YouTube Zoom combination is unique is because on something like an Instagram and Facebook, they're too curated. There's not really it's too curated, and there's obviously not the direct conversation that we're doing. Like when you use YouTube, what you said, when you listen to people on YouTube, you're like, I want to get in there. I want to meet those people. Now, there's a kind of courage you have to develop, but I actually think that's good because now it's virtuous. We're often on, say, like a Facebook, there's no courage. There's just rage at telling that person why they're wrong, right? Like it's way easier on a message board to go off on people about being wrong versus to jump into a conversation where they have to face you and you have to talk with them. Of course, you can still do it, but there's beginning of doing the work on the body, at least in that sort of setting. So the first thing I guess I want to say is there is a cultural element here, which then has to be spread and trained, of looking at the internet as something not to consume and entertain and isolate, but looking at it as a place of how can I overhear and meet? Like, how can I overhear and encounter to help solve the problem of true ignorance? Right now, a lot of people use the use the internet to learn more about what they know or to increase their knowledge versus to unveil to them what they don't know, which is actually even deeper than unveiling what you don't know. Right? Like that, like to unveil what you don't know means you need to be in these vibrant environments where you like marketplace where you can run into things. So that's how I would start with that excellent question.
Interesting. Yeah. If I may ask you a follow-up question, Seth,
Yes.
kind of related, but like tailored to you, because something that I have observed in you over the years is this like incredible sense of listening, and it's something that you've written about as a practice. But listening is also one of those things. It's a space of openness, but like to hear something, there's a choice. You have to discern, like be very specific about like what you are listening to and kind of tuning into some piece of all of this information that's around. And so maybe you have some insights you could share about how in this like very vibrant virtual space that we inhabit and so much information, like, I don't know, do you know how it is that you tune and like, is that something that you can tell us about?
Well, it's funny because before we're talking about all of this possibility, all of the stimuli and how it can be overwhelming. And I actually sometimes feel overwhelmed by all the exciting opportunities there are. Like the three of us all participate in another platform, which I think is somewhat innovative, which is the Substack platform. But I can't tell you how many interesting or even fascinating articles, at least that appear fascinating, that I do not read. Right. And there are particular people who I read one of their articles and it's so fascinating that I subscribe. And then, damn it, they put out another fascinating looking article, and then there's like 7 articles from Substack in my box that I want to read every day. So I think one of the things is also we have to make peace with the fact that we can't take that all in. But I was thinking, even when you asked Daniel, the question you asked him, like I could do the sort of backstory of this conversation, right? I was working at the Feldenkrais Guild, and I was part of their publications. And in my job, I'm constantly, I'm talking to Feldenkrais practitioners because we're featuring stories related to the Feldenkrais method. And another practitioner just said, you should talk to Larissa Babij. She has this, Substack. And that's how I found out about you. And I started reading it and I thought, this is a context that I know is relevant to the story of Feldenkrais, who very much talked about, good posture is related to survival. It's not just related to the correct alignment, how you should sit to, etc. And so, so we did that. And then with Daniel, I had spoken to a fellow that you may know of. He's sort of a big figure in what we might call the liminal web, where a lot of these conversations happen, which is John Vervaeke. This is this cognitive scientist, cognitive psychologist and philosopher, and he did this whole series. Anyway, he's very interesting in that not so much now, but in the past, despite all his credentials, he did a lot of conversations with people who were essentially nobodies like myself. Eventually, I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I find this really interesting. And I do this thing called the Feldenkrais method. And you're talking about philosophy and I see all these, connections. He's like, sure, let's talk. And so we did that. And, I kind of felt like, ooh, I got to raise my profile because I talked to John Vervaeke. But then Daniel and my friend Aspasia essentially similar thing. She ends up on John Vervaeke's podcast. I listen. I think she's interesting. And I left a comment on the video where she was talking to John Vervaeke. And I sort of basically proposed that we talk. I don't remember if I put my email. And I even, I think on YouTube, unlike other platforms, I don't think there's a direct messaging function on YouTube. So I don't think you can just message anyone with the YouTube channel. Although you could, throw your email out there, which some people would sort of say, well, don't just put your email anywhere on the internet. So there's an interesting thing there. But again, I went towards Aspasia. She eventually, we talked again, and then she connected Daniel and I. And then more recently, right, you and I are already connected, but you see some of my stuff and you sort of came forward and said, I would like to participate, right? So the question that you asked me was not exactly about that. It was more about like this discernment and this when you're listening, what are you, something like, what are you listening for? Or how do you sift through all of it? And that for me is the place where everything I learned in the Feldenkrais method, which, as you know, is a practice that takes the form of movement. But I think Feldenkrais was always very clear that this is a practice of the whole human being. And the reason I began to explore other modalities, including modalities of conversation, like the practice of circling, which I studied with Guy Sengstock, and I know that one of the videos you watched was with me and Daniel and Guy Sengstock talking together. And essentially what I learned from Guy is, you can practice Feldenkrais on the floor and notice, if your muscles are too tight, or can you loosen up, can you breathe, as you do the movement. But same thing you're in a conversation. Are you tight in the conversation? Can you breathe while you're having this conversation? And the fact is, if I'm in conversation with someone and someone says, tell me about your relationship to your daughter, suddenly that's a certain kind of challenge, just like a Feldenkrais lesson where it's like, can you balance on your left leg? I mean, they're different, but not entirely, right? And so I think in relationship and in this sort of medium that we're talking about and calling here the social coordination mechanism, I'm swimming through the social coordination mechanism day by day, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of checking my email inbox or not. Well, one of the things I learned from Guy about listening, and he would always say, people practice communication and they think it's about learning how to speak. He says, I think it's more about learning how to listen. That is even harder. But one of the things that he made clear to me is when you're listening to someone, certain things they say will set off sparks in your body. Certain things that they say will not set off sparks in your body. Like there is a direct signal in your body when the other person says something that is especially relevant, right? And we can begin to track that. And I mean, we can even get into, discussing the field, like the space between us. Even though we're in a virtual space together, there's a sense of when you say something, it changes the nature of the constellation between us. So, here's one last thing I wanted to add. I think there's always a certain random element in so much as there's too much, right? Like Daniel says, we can't meet every person on the planet. But I think what's interesting in terms of thinking about the social coordination mechanism, like how it's evolving, is, for me, I listened to John Vervaeke, and similar to what you said, Larissa, to Daniel and I, it's like a certain point, I wanted to be in the conversation. So I reached out. And so that is kind of what's happening right now, is the people who are reaching out are the ones who are in these conversations, right? But something that Daniel and I have talked about is, and a fellow Christian, maybe Daniel knows the last name, but on the last conversation at the net, a friend was talking about some sort of widget that he's working on where you would put it on any website. So let's say I'm just reading the news, but at the top of the article is a little widget that would I could click the button and it would basically say, I'd be interested in having a conversation about this. And then anyone else who happens to be on that web page who also clicks, it would connect us, right? And as we were sitting here talking, it occurred to me like, well, I know a bunch of people. Larissa knows a bunch of people. If we wanted to set up conversations between people in the US and Ukraine, as an example, we could totally do that, right? But then the sort of next level might be this kind of idea of like, how could people literally just find each other? And I mean, I think there are spaces online that are sort of set up as like online hangouts, you know, but again, not everyone knows about them, but that could be developed, you know, potentially we could imagine, you know, that you could just have a website that would be not unlike Facebook, but it's like, who wants, I mean, you know, the social media platforms do have that go live function and you can invite someone else to come in, but it's usually like, you know, so-and-so going live and they're inviting their friend. But we can imagine that the technology is already there for more or less random people to meet, which is, I think, part of what you were pointing to with those questions. But until we get to that point, I think that there's people who are already seeing the value in this, already reaching out. And if we so choose, we could look to create spaces where people who are still kind of discovering this value and pull them in. I mean, that's a possibility for sure. Anyway, I'll stop. I was speaking for quite a while there.
Well, I mean, the thing that I'm thinking, or sorry, Daniel.
Please, no, Larissa, please.
Okay, I'll just say quickly. Yeah, I guess the flip side of this thing, the thing that's starting to kind of like bubble up in me as I'm listening is actually it's actually about like, where does one set a boundary? And like, what is the thing that we do have in common enough, right? Yeah, I mean, like where it's like what these questions of, I think they're individual and they can be situational, right? Is like, how do I differentiate between like, this is the person that I do want to talk to, and this person is probably interesting, but like not interesting enough, and like things like that, you know. And I think one of the questions that we had come up in our correspondence was, and I don't know, Daniel, if you want to jump in and say something, go ahead, or I can kind of guide this. I guess I was going to bring in this idea of like, you know, nation. What is a nation? And if we started out talking about how cool it is that through technology we can transcend physical space to be able to connect, despite being in very, very different places. And again, you know, where it would take a long time and physical effort and money and et cetera to be able to actually get to a place halfway over you to come to Ukraine, for example, to be concrete about it. Excuse me, losing train of thought. Basically, yeah, but I mean, the thing that's kind of like underlying all of this is that there is the moment, you know, again, if we bring it back to Ukraine, at the moment when the neighboring country, Russia, reaches the border and says, here, we're going to kill you. Here, we're going to take your land. Or, you know, if you don't give us your land, we're going to kill you. It becomes very clear. You're like, no, this is mine. And you have to defend what is yours. Your life is at risk. You may have to kill somebody. Like, these are very serious mortal questions. And I think I wonder, in a place even like the United States, more so than Ukraine, that the United States is in a very weird place, but it isn't, and it is in a place actually where, you know, we have witnessed in the past year of government forces perpetrating violence against American people inside of the country, you know. And so, I mean, it's not like a distant abstract thing by any means. It's different than having a foreign country invade. It's more confusing. I think it's a lot more complicated, because then, you know, because these are, on the one hand, they're your people. But on the other hand, if they're perpetrating violence and trying to, against you, who are they? I mean, I think maybe that's kind of where I'm going at, which I would love to talk about with you specifically, being Americans. And I don't know, is there anything else I need to say?
I mean, not to jump in, but I think you're just putting your finger on like everything that is of the utmost importance. So there's a few things. So first, there is a question of discernment. So if I go on, so just to make some example, if I go online and I see somebody's video, for example, and it's very clear that they're trying to get followers, like they're trying to build their platforms and get big numbers, that tends to be a bad signal for me, because they're using the internet to consume, and to build a profile and all of that, right? And to become a quote unquote expert, right? To be the kind of, I do a lot of work with the great Cadell Last, and we'll talk about people kind of Lacan and different ones talking about the neurotic, how people want a big other to tell them what to think. They want the professor that gives them all the answers. And you can see people playing that role, and they build a platform from people who are in a way perhaps psychologically immature and are looking for someone to quilt their worldview together, looking to quilt their psyche together, right? So that tends to be a bad sign. But if I jump on and see Seth and Aspasia talking, who are, clearly not in the game of platform building or attentionalism, and they're thinking, and here's the key, they're thinking through thoughts that they may be thinking through for the first time, not have the answer on, and it's live. Like people who want to have the role of the big other or being the expert will not live in person publicly very often, if ever, live think through something and not have the answers, right? Because it would hurt their legitimacy. It would hurt their reputation. It would hurt their power, right? But when people are willing to publicly kind of wrestle through things, one, you feel like, well, I feel the same way. And actually, those kind of conversations often become much more real and much more productive. So this becomes a signal of the kind of person I want to speak with, because these people are actually clearly in it for the right reasons, where they're trying to take a guess at the riddle, where they're trying to kind of wrestle through these different things, right? And so, like, that's a very important signal. I think another extremely important signal is people bringing in their own story, bringing it back to the body, bringing in the emotions, bringing in the felt sense, because without going into it, a lot of the philosophical tradition I take very, very seriously, whether it be the Scottish Enlightenment, what I call the modern counter-Enlightenment, all of them warn that ideas are actually a problem. They talk about philosophy, like the greatest challenge of philosophy is philosophy. Like philosophy is almost kind of a mental disease, because you get into abstraction that takes you out of your body, and then you actually turn to power, and it does all of these different things that like Planier or Hume or people are warning about. But point is, philosophy is very dangerous. But also, if you don't do philosophy, you can't self-defend yourself. You'll be manipulated, and you actually need it in a complex world, right? So philosophy is dangerous but necessary. So what do, right? Well, you have to always work very hard to keep it connected to the concrete, grounded in the body, and so on and so forth. So if I'm listening to someone and ideas, it sounds like, to use that famous Jung idea, it sounds like ideas have them more than them have ideas. That's a dangerous signal, right? And one of the great problems is I believe that we exist in a world that doesn't have the sufficient infrastructure to keep the average person's ideas from running them more than them running their ideas. And that's why democracy is also failing. Because like a lot of times, like if you mentioned the ICE example, I think a lot of the people in ICE, it's almost like their politics is living through them more than they're living their politics. Their ideas of how the world is, they become like puppets. They become like we're just kind of pulled along by these forces that get into our head that we don't even think through, right? And they kind of pull us along. How do we create a world that keeps people from getting there? That increases the probability that people are not so infected by ideas? Well, for me, the flow of interaction like we're doing here is a big part of it. I would like to move, I think schools should be way more in the direction of oral education, especially with AI, oral education than written, because the medium of the schoolroom teaches you that an educated person is good at trivia, to take that Neil Postman example. Teacher asks a random question, who can answer it first? Smart person can answer random questions, right? I think this has nothing to do with being educated. Education is way more about discernment, meeting a person face to face, thinking through things you've never thought through before live. That is way more what education is, right? And if you were educated in that way, I think you would be less likely to end up being a puppet on ideas and brought into situations that increase the probability of violence or that lead to these situations where then we have all of these problems. Of course, I don't mean to be an idealist, but I think that basically the infrastructure that is in place increases the chances that in a way we're puppeted by our ideologies or we're puppeted by a strong man or we're infected by ideas or things like that. And so I think we just got to do a lot of work to change how people think about what it means to be informed. I think most people think about being informed, meaning I go on the internet and read articles that prove my side of things. I'm learning about Ukraine, but really I'm learning it through my filter or something like that, as opposed to being informed means I have the possibility of being formed in conversation in spaces like that to become different kinds of subjects. So again, I know I keep talking about the social coordination mechanism, but I really do see it as a critical medium condition that is needed for us to actually be able to carry ourselves in a world today without just ending tangled up, not knowing what to do, and things get worse and worse. I think when it comes to the question of when someone is at your door with a gun or you are in a situation of self-defense, then yes, there's a certain realism of self-defense. These people will kill you. There is defending yourself. There is all of those sort of characteristics, right? And one has to do, I mean, I am no expert. I am not in the situation, but there is something extremely valid to be said about one must do what one must do, right? Whatever that looks for. And I know that's open-ended and that's just reality. The question also, though, then becomes the second question with it is what is, as we've talked about, what does it mean to reconcile? What does it mean to forget? If you have an ICE agent that kills your daughter or something horrible like that, what would it mean to, how should you relate to that person? What does it even mean to relate to those people? Like, what do we mean? If we think Trump is a complete monster and someone is a Trump supporter, do I never talk to them again? You get into all of those questions and things like that open up. Again, I think often we think about those questions firstly in terms of an intellectual position. Do I talk to them again or not? When really we almost need to ask questions of what kind of work do I need to do on my nervous system or body to even begin thinking that question, right? Like, have you gone, like, as a very real example, have you gone through Feldenkrais before you ask the question of how you talk to the ICE agent you think is a terrible person? If not, you probably shouldn't even be asking that question yet, right? Have you actually learned to listen to someone? No? Well, then you shouldn't even be asking that question yet. Like, have you gone to where you think about being informed or learning do you think about being right as having the right position or being able to hold yourself in a space of interaction that is able to let the conversation unfold or the learning happen, right? Like, until you have those kind of shifts about you, how you think about even being able to enter into those spaces, I think you can't answer them because it's not going to you're asking for the brain to just take a mental position when human beings are ultimately full-bodied experiences and things like that. So I know there's a lot more that needs to be said, but I'll stop for now. There are things also. Well, I guess the last thing I will say is on the idea of the average person sort of kind of being part of things like this. I think well, actually, I'll stop because that would go more into the social coordination mechanism stuff. But I'll pause.
Yeah, are we starting to get to the answers that you were looking for in those questions, Larissa? Are we still hovering like somewhere above?
I feel like we've moved in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to invite you if you wanted to sort of pinpoint something, because I don't know if we entirely did answer your questions just yet.
Yeah, no, actually, no. Something I noticed there was there's like an unarticulated space between two things that Daniel said. And I'm trying, I will have to probably say it out loud to kind of remember what it was, but it was between this ideal education, which I totally agree with about, like that people who are educated to be able to think in real time about things that they're encountering for the first time would make them much less prone to being manipulated to just following, you know, kind of pre-ascribed patterns, or other people's designs for them. And this moment of like having to defend yourself when there's a person pointing a gun at you. Like there's a huge space between those two extremes. I mean, I already have basically been living for 4 years in a condition where maybe I don't feel it every single second of every day necessarily. But, you know, like I am the target of being killed by Russia, like just by virtue of living in Ukraine every single second of every minute of every day. And that is even something that one can get used to be able to sit and have a lovely Zoom conversation with two very intelligent friends across the ocean. But that's a reality. And in the sense, you know, in the fact that I haven't joined the armed forces for the past 4 years, it means that I've also accepted a certain kind of level of risk that like, okay, I'm gonna just try my luck. Which is not necessarily like a particularly virtuous position, but that is where we are at the present moment. I feel like the United States has been and is still today, but in a kind of increasingly getting closer to this threshold, is also in a place where like that potential of any person finding themselves, you know, being at the receiving end of meeting someone with a gun is getting closer and closer, and kind of shit. No, this is my question. Like we're getting like my, you know, my question to you as people who live abroad, who live in the United States, is like, so like on the one hand, yes, there is the conditions in the United States, but in the other sense, my sense right now is the longer that the massive war that to an extent we could call, you know, one of its beginnings would be Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, in the way that the rest of the world is kind of like, you know, vacillated between, you know, not totally capitulating, but not defending itself nor Ukraine to an extent, is that you get these like, I don't know, is it true for you? Can I claim that you specifically, you as individuals, this may sound like harsh, you know, is it true that like that you're just kind of waiting for that next intensification to happen? Are you waiting for that gun or that missile to be knocking at your door? Because sometimes I feel like that, even when you talk about, you know, the things that Ukrainians have learned. Ukrainians have lots of experience. We really do. All of us who are still here, we've gone through all sorts of things, good and bad. By no means only good, by no means only virtuous, by no means only strong. We're damaged as well, just to an equal degree. But we're not here so that people in Europe can just like, I don't know, I guess I was having a conversation the other day, literally yesterday, with a friend of mine in the armed forces, you know, when we were talking about the likelihood of Russia invading Poland, say within the next year, which is something that several people, I'm not going to remember who exactly, have written about publicly recently. And it sounds like, you know, quite a viable, if not necessarily likelihood that it will happen, it would be possible, at least. And, you know, again, friends who had come back from visiting people in the Netherlands were also saying that, like, you know, civilians were kind of starting to pack their go bags, and it's this weird kind of, my sense, this is my sense of what it is the sense that it's like people who are not preparing in order to like even protect themselves, but it's, I don't know whether it's like it's a game, or it feels not serious. It feels like the sense of, if it were serious for you, you would be doing something differently now. And I don't know. And like, it's a kind of audacious thing for me to tell you what you are not feeling, but I mean, I'm trying to do it so that you might tell me, how correct or incorrect I am. Yeah.
I think this is a totally relevant question. I mean, even just hearing the question orients me differently. And I mean, I appreciate that you made clear I'm not speaking to Americans as an abstraction. Like, I'm on a Zoom call with two people. I'm talking to you guys. But I think it's absolutely a question that, would be valuable for anyone in the United States to ask. And what happens for me when you use the verb waiting, are you waiting? I can hear that in two different ways. Like, on the one hand, like I've sort of thrown out this image of an attack on DC more than once. Well, there's no attack on DC right now. So that's kind of an abstraction, but are there things, I mean, there's people, we've talked about, government forces have killed people in the United States, and then there's been National Guard in DC, and actually someone who's upset with the U.S. government killed one of the National Guard, or two National Guard troops in DC. And so there's a sense of waiting in terms of like, will gas prices go up, or will violence take place in my neighborhood? And that's a sort of like a guessing game, maybe. And part of what I hear in your question is like, look at the pattern. There is an inevitability here, like, and so, but then there becomes a more specific guessing game about like, well, how soon do I think this is going to happen? Like, what literally would it mean to prepare? Anyways, but there's a whole different kind of question that I've been really present to, and your question really brings me to, which is, okay, I have spent time studying the Feldenkrais method. I have worked with my body. I have been in these conversations. There are things, that I can't do, but there are things I can do. Where should I position myself? Am I waiting, to be called, or can I actually see where I could go to? Like, I mean, I participate in a men's group, and on Netflix, this new documentary has just come out called Inside the Manosphere, and it's this big viral thing because it's all about these influencers in the style of Andrew Tate, who are misogynistic, and they're talking to young men, and they're doing all these things. They're debasing women left and right and acting like this is okay. And so it's bringing up a lot of discussion. Well, the people who lead the men's group I'm in decided to have a conversation about this documentary. And they invited another guy, and the three of them were talking. And then they invited, people in the chat to like, say, what do you think? And so there was a woman who responded in the chat and was like, well, I appreciate that you guys are doing this, but you missed all of these things, and she was critical of them in a number of ways. And what I thought was just like, I can see the validity of a lot of what she's saying, but what they did is they put themselves in a place where they could be criticized, right? They actually moved towards the discussion. They moved and they exposed themselves. And so actually one of the questions that I've been asking myself, and I hear it in your question, is like, could I be exposing myself more? Something that I did late last year at a certain point, and it just kind of came to me as an experiment, and then it felt correct. But I meditate every day. I meditate every day in my apartment. I thought, I'll go meditate in front of the White House. And the idea I had was kind of like, what am I doing? I'm listening. And there's like a lot of sound in front of the White House. But also I wanted to go and show what it looks like to be present and listen and do it in that space. And it immediately felt different to me. And it actually resonated in my system of like, oh, this is a much more valuable thing to do on some level than to just meditate in my apartment by myself. I mean, it wasn't exactly activism, but it was a kind of a political signal that I was sending. I was exposing myself more. As it turns out, at a certain point, the Trump administration has this whole idea about beautifying Washington, D.C. to prepare for the 250th anniversary, and they're going to do all this patriotic and military displays. They shut the park down, right? And one of the things I've been thinking about, because I explored this a little bit, is, well, where else in public should I be meditating? And I've sort of dropped it. For the time being, I'm not doing it. And every once in a while, I'm thinking like, did you just sort of surrender like too soon? And I mean, I just wanted to give a concrete example, but I think that anyway, I can also feel that like I don't fully have the answer to your question, but this is why, I mean, in our training in Feldenkrais, Feldenkrais is always about questions. It's not, here's the correct movement. It's make the movement slowly in such a way that you can pay attention to, what's happening and how does it feel? And then we can ask all kinds of specific questions about it, but those questions already direct our attention in a particular way. I'd love to pass it over to Daniel, but I have been feeling this, and it is a somatic experience in my body. It is in my nervous system. Like, hey, you know how to do certain things that can help people. Who are the people you want to help? Like, where should you be doing these things? How should you be organizing your time? Even, like we all need an income, but how much should you be prioritizing your income versus, you could go over here and make no money, but you could be helpful. Like, so I think these are really real questions. And I think just the last thing I'll say that I appreciate about the question is, I think we can hide behind something that is not as abstract as we portray it to be. As you point out, yes, people have begun dying in the streets in the United States in a way that we hadn't seen before. Like there is a real measurable difference in the experience here and now, as opposed to 5-10 years ago. And it really does call us to respond. And I think a lot of us are in a sort of numbed out place, or maybe just a place where we're not used to being courageous. We're not, or our idea of courageous ends at a certain place. And it's like, well, maybe now what you're being called to do is go further than you've ever gone before. I feel that. So, and I'm still sitting with it. So, but let me give Daniel an opportunity to respond to that as well.
No, fantastic. The first thing is, you're right. There's a massive gap between those, Larissa. And I suppose the first thing that just comes to mind with it is that I don't want to be someone who is not in a situation that finds, their life is in jeopardy, their children is in jeopardy, their home is in jeopardy, and they make the decision to defend themselves. They kill someone, they do something like that, and act as if I know or can say what should have been done or what is better, right? Because I think that's terrible. And so I don't, on that idea of when you're in a position of self-defense, there's something that is remarkably concrete and lived about that experience that person in that experience can only know. So I just kind of want to make space for that is kind of what I have in mind, right? Because there's a part of too where a lot of what I'm saying about the social coordination mechanism, there's a weird way in which I simultaneously see remarkable potential into it and also a simultaneous weakness. Like the social coordination mechanism cannot help you deal with someone at your door that has a gun, right? It may help the world be such a place where the likelihood of that occurring is less. Or when the person is there, they may question themselves more, but can it do something once stuff hits the fan? It doesn't seem as much, right? Like stuff hits the fan. And then the problem is we have to make decisions about the people at the door or the nation invading in the mindsets and the way of being trained by the outdated medium and education system that I think makes it worse, thus increasing the direness. So that, I have that in mind, kind of this kind of double move of great potential, but also weakness. And I do think there is a certain direness to what's happening, that we have a lot of stuff hitting the fan and people being asked to think about stuff that have been not rightly habituated or trained by which to rightly approach it. And it's more likely to just explode into us versus them, war, conflict, violence, and so on. As a personal example, I went to China back in 2009. Was in the Guanyuan, Sichuan. I have many connections in China and love the Chinese. And I proceeded to listen to 15 years of the Chinese in the West being demons and monsters and terrible people, and going, oh my gosh, this needs to be stopped because these are actually wonderful people. And a lot of the people out in Guanyuan have nothing to do with the government. They don't think anything of it. They don't even like Beijing, but they are monsters. And it feels like you're watching a kind of snowball go down a hill, and you're wanting to stop it, but you have the information technology and the narratives are going, and you see this thing that's coming that can be incredibly dire. And you're like, my goodness, could we just stop it if the average person could talk to one of those people in Guanyuan like I did? Could you just stop it if the people down the street of the diner could have that experience? But when are they going to get off from their 9 to 5 to get on a plane to go over there? Where would they even need to begin, right? Is there a way to close that gap so that these narratives that get rolling could be stopped before it gets there? And that's part of the way I think about the social coordination mechanism, because I have been, for just basically horrified by the development of the conversation about China over many, many years. And it's like, how do we stop this? Because now it feels like it has a life of its own, right? So that's something in my own personal background. One of the things I guess what I want to say is I really appreciate your question, because that's just a wonderful example of, I guess, why I believe in this technology, where you're asking me, so what are you doing, Daniel? Waiting? Have I thought about that? Can I describe to you what I'm doing? How do I think about it? Well, I'm not sure if I would have been put in a space to think about it by someone unless I was here in this conversation. I actually really need to be put in that space. Actually, CNN ain't going to put me on that space. Fox News, they're not going to put me on that space. The guy down the street isn't going to put me in that space, right? Because they're probably doing it as well, right? Like, to actually be in a place where you have to think about what exactly are you doing, and to be able to move it into articulation, I think is very powerful. And I appreciate that. And, if I look at myself, I guess there's a few things I think about, whether they're adequate or not responses. Hard to say. I guess with something like Ukraine, I feel like I can't even talk to people in America about Ukraine without them getting mad, right? They can't even talk about it without them getting angry or taking a side or telling me, well, I read this article that says X, Y, and Z. Well, I read this article that said they're all trapped in their ideological bubbles. And I do feel like, as an America, I can't do anything with Ukraine unless I get many people to agree with me or to do something with the government. Or if the government says, yes, we're going to send missiles over there, like, or we're going to send troops, or we're going to do something, right? Like, if that's not going to occur, then there's this feeling of, what can I even do, right? And especially, it's like, well, you could have conversations, but then I look around and you can talk with people and, like, at least get the democratic process. It often feels to me, involved in town, that you can't even, like, the conditions of possibility for people to even be able to think these problems, because their nervous systems are so wrecked, are not even there. It's bad. And so then you kind of step back, and I guess for me, with belonging again and everything, you're kind of going, well, what would have to change in the condition of the society by which consensus or even thinking about this would even be possible? Because until that, you just feel, I guess I feel very atomized. I feel very kind of fractured, where it's very even difficult to bring a certain consensus to even know what you could do, right? Because are you going to get on a plane with your own rifle and go over to a different country or something like that? Is that irresponsible to your own family? What about your own responsibilities, and et cetera, so forth, right? And what can you do with a 22 versus a cruise missile versus drones or things? So those are the tensions that I feel. I can't, what am I feel like, I suppose there's a certain, well, trying to do the work, I guess, to be part of making, like I keep saying, like tilling the ground to where we can even approach these matters. Because that's what I feel like as an American, that it's just so fragmented. That's at least how I feel. But I do want to at least point to an appreciation of being asked that question. Because, you may never, I would easily never be in a situation to think that or to have to articulate it. And now I'll go from this conversation and can I actually put that better into thought? Can I articulate that better or think about it? So I'll pause, but I appreciate that, Larissa.
Thank you. I appreciate both what Seth said about kind of exposing yourself, and Daniel very much about also your appreciation of being asked the question, because I think, yes, there is something that, just this virtue of like coming together towards each other, which is already creating a new kind of space, which neither of us was in before. I also appreciated what you said about kind of like not wanting to dwell on this like abstract idea of having to defend yourself with a gun, if that's something that's so distant from your experience. I respect that. And it made me think again about those ways in which like we people in an abstract, I'll say this in an abstract sense right now, because lots of different people do this in different ways, is, how we do band together into, outside of, personal life and family life. We band into communities. There have been, societies organized into tribes, and we were in a long period of organizing into countries, which we still are, although, those things, I feel like the way that countries and nation states function today, as opposed to even 50 years ago, is different. And maybe, and again, that is a place in which we defend ourselves so that we don't have to be, in a person to person, so-and-so has a bigger weapon than me or is more powerful. And maybe this is the question that kind of we've been circling around all day, is what is this space in which we can be like safe enough to be open, but not like completely open to everyone and everything at all hours, because we're human beings and that would kill us. And yeah, and like by what mechanism do we decide who we're together with, and how do we regulate? Maybe that's the thing. I think perhaps in previous times, without as much technological assistance, there were just sort of more like natural things, like you can't travel as far, so you're limited to the amount of people because of your abilities to physically meet them, for example, or your economic capacities or something. And so all of a sudden this is like within our choice. It's like we, because we theoretically could be friends. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've got, definitely over 1,000 Facebook friends. I would say the vast majority of which I actually have run into sometime in my life. They're not like bots. But still, it's far more of a number than I can actually have, like a decent relationship with. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like I still think about these things, even, in my decisions, kind of how do I decide what to, how to organize those connections, like the people that I even, I'm like very much talking about real people that I'm genuinely connected with, that is still more than my human kind of attention and time. I feel that kind of like a conflict between whom I would want to have in my world. And again, maybe that's it. Like there are a lot of people whom I would want to have in my imaginary nation state, which I don't know exactly what it's organized by, besides the people that I just like. These happen, several hundred people. But but like in the world that we're in now, I have to like reach out and make an effort to like maintain personal relationships with each one of them, because there isn't one single factor that would bring all of us together at the same time. There you go.
I love the phrase the imaginary nation state, because I think about something like that as well. I mean, when we're talking about sort of allegiances, I almost feel more allegiance to the people on this Zoom call than I do necessarily to the US government. I mean, I suppose that could sound naive in all kinds of ways, but it's like I'm having a shared experience that feels really human with the two of you. We happen to be in different places, we have different situations, but, you know, and obviously there are more people I would include, but it's like those people with whom I can be human with, that feel human to me in the way that they respond to me. And I think one of the things that's difficult is that we really are experiencing this at different levels, right? I mean, I can listen to you speak, Larissa, and hear all kinds of things that I resonate with, like, oh yeah, I go through that too. But I also know that I don't go through what you go through. And yet the similarity of the pattern of the experience at different degrees of intensity seems really valuable to take note of. I mean, I also want to add, in response to the question you were asking us, there's a part of me that's viscerally aware that if there were to be violence against my family and I turned out to be unable to defend my family, I would be deeply ashamed, or I don't know if ashamed would be the word, but like I'm aware right now that there are things that could come up that I literally wouldn't know how to respond to. And I mean, part of the problem is I can't predict what of the infinite number of unexpected things those will be. But I mean, I think you're very right to just call out violence as an experience. Like, you know, I could take some martial arts classes, and I've done that in the past and haven't really continued. And every once in a while I think about it and it's like, oh, sure, I could talk about that in terms of my physical health, but actually that's not even really why I should be taking the martial arts classes. Like maybe I should really get better at physically defending myself. And, you know, from what I understand from a distance, you know, the martial artist often has a different level of regulation in their nervous system, precisely because they know I'm going to be able to handle certain things that could come up. It's like, you know, I may or may not be in a fight right now, but if I find myself just in the same physical location with people who look violent, you know, I could be in favor of peace in all kinds of ways. But I mean, you know, back to that quote I mentioned from Trotsky, like someone might just be interested in bringing the violence to me. And, you know, I could naively think I could handle it, or I could train myself in order to be able to respond. And should that never actually materialize, I might still gain quite a lot through that training. This is something that Daniel and Michelle have had some conversations about. Like, are you preparing for survival or are you preparing for thriving? And actually, how different are those two things? It could be that being really sure that you could survive anything might be part of how you thrive, right? And yeah, I can certainly feel, I can easily imagine the situations that would overwhelm me. And when I think that way, I think, okay, there's too many of them for me to like check off all of them that I'm prepared, but it really would be probably a good thing for me to think through more. How do I prepare for those things? And there is a way that, yeah, it could just creep along. I mean, there's a separate question of like, I just want to touch on again in terms of like, what can I do that might have a material effect in the world that would, you know, be a net positive? And that too, I could think of all kinds of different things, and I'm going to have to choose the one thing, right? Or I could just do a bunch of random stuff all the time, but that's not likely to be effective. But I think these are Yeah, I just think that these are really, really necessary questions. And I think, like Daniel was saying, I think that for the most part, we I'm thinking, I guess, of the United States, but even across the world, I think many of us are just totally unprepared. I mean, the United States, despite all, as you said, all the sort of strange constellations that have begun to manifest here, it's pretty good bet that I can just go about my day with no problem, day to day. And that's been my experience for all the time that I've lived. So can I begin to imagine that my past is not my future, and begin to live differently? And it really does require me to break my patterns. And we all know how on any given day, the easiest thing is to not break my patterns and just to do the same thing. If I want to sign up for that martial arts class, it's going to disturb my schedule. I'm going to have to move other stuff. I'm going to have to do those things. So yeah, I mean, I need to think about these things. Absolutely.
I agree. And I'm that wonderful question Larissa was asking about kind of the standard, like how do you determine who you interact with in this space? What is this space, etc. If I reflect on my own life, I guess the way I look at it is, so for me, a lot of interactions are tied to this question of the problem of I don't know what I don't know. And I need to find people who are going to make me realize something I don't know what I don't know. And then I'm going to have to wrestle with that and kind of come to terms with it. So, for example, I don't know, like when I first encounter someone, like if I go all the way back and I think about a Cadell, and I hate him, seems to one, be open to difference. They're able to listen and they have a certain quality in them that seems to be really alive. So maybe I don't know. Actually, maybe I'm wrong about these thinkers that this person is interested in. Maybe there's something more to it, right? So then you listen and you go, oh, wait a minute, right? So likewise, if you encounter Seth talking about Feldenkrais, like, I don't know what that is, but just looking at how he holds himself, looking at how he listens, how he talks, maybe there's something I don't know about this. Because the natural temptation is to kind of be like, well, if it was important, I would know about it, right? But instead to go, no, I don't know that I don't know. And so let me listen to this person, or Asperger with ISTD, all these different things that then you kind of put yourself in the toolage of that. Like you put yourself in the place to encounter that thing that you haven't experienced, that then forces you to acknowledge that you don't know the fullness of that thing. And now you have to make a choice. Are you going to learn the fullness of that thing or not? But if you don't, now you're morally responsible. You're more morally responsible for that. You can't deny you're repressing it now, right? You can't deny you're repressing it. So you're forced to act, right? You're forced to make a decision. And a lot of how I guess I've used the social coordination mechanism is in a way, I'm looking for people of whom are going to help me learn what I don't know, who are not going to weaponize my true ignorance against me. They're not going to use it against me, but actually help me unfold with it, like to learn through it, right? Like, so for example, like with talking to you today, Larissa, like when Seth made that invitation, like I know I don't know what it's like to be in a war zone. Like I know that I'm not aware of what that experience is like. And furthermore, then what happens in a conversation like this, when I'm asked, like, what are you doing when you're waiting? Like, I'm now forced to have to think through that. Like, I'm now forced to have to kind of confront that and to kind of unfold with that. And that's actually really, really important. Because that's going to force something of me that otherwise it wouldn't force of me. And so that's really, really important. So I guess what I was saying, because I know the internet may have died for a second there. Mine has been it's getting very windy, so mine might be part of it as well. But I guess what I was saying is I'm looking for people online who I intuit or have a feeling that they may help me know what I don't know, not to weaponize that against me, but to actually walk me through that and develop with that, so that parts of me develop that otherwise would have never developed, right? I'm not looking for people that are going to help me know more about the thinkers I already like or the ideas I already have. But I'm also not looking for the thinkers who disagree with what I think, because because often that's preset in the debate. I'm looking for the people to help me realize what I don't know, who are going to help me walk through that and then make a decision about that, because I'm no longer able to repress it, what I was saying. So, like, for example, like with talking to you today, Larissa, like, I don't know what it's like to be in a war zone, right? And by talking with you, because also listening to your videos or reading your articles, it's very clear that you're an individual who is not going to weaponize that true ignorance against me, but actually invite me into it so that I have to come to terms with it, wrestle with it, develop with it, right? So when you ask me, so what are you doing? Are you waiting? I now have to think through that. I now have to wrestle with that. And for me, that's a major gift, because that requires a development and a work in the body and in the emotions and the full self that otherwise would never occur, right? And how much worse would I be if that never occurred? Because I also wouldn't know it didn't ever occur unless I was in this interaction, right? Like anything you never encounter, you also don't know you never encountered, right? So you missed out on nothing. Oh, well, that's kind of damnation, right? When you miss out on nothing and you missed out on everything, that's a form of real damnation. And so I am making decisions on who I am going to interact with and speak with on terms of people of whom I think, and of course I don't know perfectly, but you're always making estimated discernments best you can. People who are going to put me in a situation, who are going to invite me into a true ignorance that then I will have to wrestle through over weeks and think through and come to terms with. Because another reason why it's important, it's something I think about all the time. If stuff continues with America, a draft is very possible. And how would I feel about that? Would I feel as if I'm being manipulated by the government to go protect their interests? Or am I being put on the front lines to stop something that's going to develop with Russian aggression forever? Am I just going to be put in Iran to, defend a president who just doesn't want to admit he made a mistake, or different things like that? By having a conversation that forces me to think through what I am doing with waiting, that actually helps me come more to terms with that possibility and how I would experience it and what I would do in that possibility, right? And that's a gift. And I suppose I'll just close to say that becomes a standard of decision making for me, that I use this space to look for. And I'm glad for the space to have that opportunity.
Yeah, that's kind of a nice place. I feel like we've gone around a circle, this way, that way. One should go counterclockwise and clockwise. Yeah, we did it. We opened the space. I feel like that's what we've done. Which, not like we could launch a nation state today. That would be much too soon. Political campaigns further on season would be in the fall, but wow. Yeah, no, this is wonderful to what would you say? Yeah, to break that wall of passive versus active, passive listening to a recording and having a real conversation. It's been, I really appreciate both of your perspectives coming in, like the specificity. I mean, I feel like, just such richness from each of you in like really different ways. Yeah, yikes. The world is still like totally incomprehensible to me, but that is to be expected.
Yeah, it's that tangle that you spoke about at the beginning. But my experience from being in many conversations like this one, although this is unlike any of those other conversations in many ways as well, we don't untangle the tangle, but we learn new ways to be in the tangle, right? Or we learn to be in the tangle together. I mean, there's just a very simple experience of realizing someone else is in the tangle also, and we can look at each other and say, oh yeah, which does actually do something in my nervous system. There is something that that's allowed to settle. At the same time, I think a conversation like this, makes me aware of contractions that I didn't know were there, and so there's a way that conversation like this provokes me and unsettles me. But I do think I think there's a value in that, right? And just like we learned in our Feldenkrais training, like it's a question of like how much can I digest at once? I don't try to digest more than I can, but often my capacity is much more than I know because I've never tested it, right? And so actually testing that capacity is really important. I don't know if this would tie in, but from our conversation, I think a couple of years ago now, in the back of my mind, I mean, it was just such an important point back then, but you told the story of learning to use a rifle. And you've already explained that, you're not part of the armed forces, but you're using your voice. But as I recall it, because I didn't have a chance to re-listen recently, but this was, sure, it was a technical thing on one level, but it was also a confrontation with yourself. And it was like, how am I self-organized in the world? And so I don't know if that feels appropriate to speak to. I certainly wanted to at least gesture at it. But, we're more or less coming to the time we all said we had available. But I'd love to just allow you both any final thoughts. And if you wanted to speak to that, Larissa, I thought it would be very, very appropriate.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because it was something that I was also reflecting on before our conversation this afternoon in a very funny way, that like what I remember from that experience, like one of the things it may have been the first time that I actually shot like an automatic rifle, and the sense of power, like being able to wield deadly power it's a big deal. And being trained, and and I think this is something that we had talked about in the conversation, was there's this fact that like if you've never done it before, you're kind of helpless in this situation, whereas if you are trained to be able to use a weapon and to use it with skill, and you've taken the time to both encounter and learn to deal with all of those things that come up in your body and in your nervous system, from, nervousness, tension, things that also will interfere with you being able to wield that weapon properly, or like affect it or wield it in the way to do the thing that you want it to do versus whatever happens. Right. So like going through all of that training, you have that power and then you have a choice that either you use it or you don't use it. Whereas if you haven't gone through that whole process, you're just lacking. I mean, in this sense, it's very parallel to Daniel's sense of like, you don't know what you don't know. It's just this like empty space. Yeah, which actually I think is it's empowering, and it's good. It's good to be empowered, to be able to know that like I can do this and I can choose to do it or not do it. And the funny thing is, when I was thinking about it today, I was like, what makes me feel empowered today? And it's like cooking for myself. Like I had been through a whole long period of time where I just didn't have time to like cook. And so I'd end up going to cafes or something. And just like the fact of like making my own meals and being able to feed myself with like the food that I chose and put is also incredibly empowering. And so like there are all these like very fundamental like survival things. Again, like if you're able to maintain your own survival, that really like it does a lot for your mental state. And then like you become just, I don't know, it's just like a sense of being a more competent human being. And I'm, feel more competent meeting other human beings and stuff like that. So basic needs are both being able to feed yourself and being able to defend yourself, and probably several other things as well.
I would just say that that's fantastic. Ivan Illich talks about how our age is defined by disablement we don't know that we're disabled by. We don't know that we're not able to feed ourselves because we have access to a grocery store. And in fact, you can sometimes in modernity feel like you're irresponsible and being kind of almost egotistical to feed yourself if you could go to the experts, right? Who do you think you are, right? And I think that contributes to this feeling of disablement and lack of power. And Vervaeke talks about the meaning crisis and all of that. And I think you spoke to that extremely powerfully. I think also, I know you spoke about with the weapon, like, if you're anti-gun, it's even more important to learn how to use the gun so that choice actually is greater. That's a huge point, is that it's a very different thing to be incapable of doing something and versus capable of doing it and choosing not to do it. That's a very big difference. And that difference makes a world of difference in one's life. So I think everything you spoke to is extraordinary. I will say to that very point that you were getting at, I think, again, the last thing I'll say with the social coordination mechanism is that I find it very empowering to have the opportunity or the ability to speak with someone in Ukraine, such as yourself, Larissa, in this world where it is so difficult to access those things, to be able to come into a space, to have that conversation and to do it yourself. And this is where the work y'all do in Feldenkrais or working on the nervous system is so important, is because that enables people to be able to do that, to handle kind of or encountering people who are different, who have different ideas. Like we do exist in a world of a kind of radical conversational relational disablement where people feel incapable of hearing political views they disagree with or the stuff that people are dealing with in their life. They don't have that power. And certainly if people feel disempowered regarding their very ability to relate to other people, that's almost the worst form of disablement. That's like the deepest form of disablement, because we really can't be ourselves without other people. And at that point, we can't even be who we are. So I very much appreciate this opportunity, and thank you both.
Thank you. Yes. And finally, welcome. How do I say? I would invite you both to come visit Ukraine. I'm here most of the time, so it can be sooner, it can be later. You can take some time to ponder it, but I do hope that we continue to find ways to communicate online, in person, etc., etc.
Thank you, Larissa.
A beautiful invitation, and I hope we could do that, actually. I'm very aware that I don't even know what it means when I say that, but it just feels like if I speak from my heart, I want to accept your invitation without knowing all that, is actually entailed. But meanwhile, it would be a pleasure to do this again if the two of you would like. We can continue this on whatever, schedule makes sense. And I'm glad that the lights were on, the whole time for you. We will, I'll just say for anyone listening, I'll put some links, of course, under the video, but Larissa has an article from February about, there's a whole schedule of when the lights are on and when the lights are not on. And this is part of what she's living day in, day out. I mean, you could easily look at Larissa's Zoom square and not really understand all that she's holding as she speaks with us today. So again, it's a real honor that you reached out to initiate this conversation. It was a pleasure that I could include Daniel, who I always enjoy speaking with, and just many thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. A complete delight.